In the early years of our present century, a group of government and military men gathered to evaluate the possibilities of a new vehicle for use by the Army. Here, the air age began. Many of the early designs were not the most reliable aircraft. In point of fact, some proved themselves to be no aircraft at all. But man was determined to fly, and the beginning of the air age was also inevitably the beginning of the widespread development of the parachute. True, even as late as World War I, most American pilots did not wear parachutes. But as air warfare developed, the French and the Germans made them regulation issue among their pilots. In the years just after World War I, the parachute in America remained a device for barnstorming stuntmen. But by the early 1930s, Russia, looking ahead to the time when she would need shock troops for her global plans, began experimenting with the parachute for military use. This experimenting was not confined to human parachutists, but included vehicles and weapons. The airplanes at their disposal were crude, but their vision of the future role of the parachute in military operations was clear. And even in these so-called peacetime years, every means of increasing communist striking power was to be explored. They worked out an early method for cargo drops in which the parachute was dropped before the cargo. They even tried dropping manned vehicles without benefit of parachute. But though some attempts were successful, it became clear that the parachute was the most practical means of air-to-ground delivery. Even before the actual beginning of World War II, the parachute's new and more deadly role was put to the test by the Germans. On a larger scale than their earlier drops into Norway, the Nazis' airborne operations in the early blitzkrieg thrusts in Europe set a pattern. They were the first to mount really large-scale, successful airborne attacks as they dropped into the Netherlands and scored a major success in the parachute blitz of the island of Crete. This highly profitable Nazi paratroop attack on Crete established clearly in military thinking the importance of this kind of highly mobile striking force. By the time America began massing her forces in England for the invasion of Normandy, our own paratroop units were in being, highly trained and formidably able at their work. The time for using the men of America's airborne infantry had come, and the men were ready. During World War II, the parachute found a great many other uses. Vast areas of the enemy's shipping lanes were seeded with mines from the air, with parachutes to slow their descent and prevent detonation from landing shock. Toward the end of the war, the Germans came up with an unusual ribbon chute, designed to act as an air brake for dive bombers and gliders. The Russians continued their experimenting too. They worked out a complicated two-stage canopy which would bring their paratroopers down at greater speed. A smaller canopy slowed the fall for most of the descent, then a larger square-shaped canopy opened to cushion the final approach to the ground. It was interesting and it worked, but it never came into widespread use. In Korea, techniques for parachute delivery of huge masses of combat materiel to the front lines were developed to an almost exact science. Special chutes big enough to drape a suburban home had been developed. Chutes big enough to handle jeeps, artillery, even light armor. The big nylon umbrellas had brought a great change in the concept of military supply. Tons of essential combat materiel could be delivered over distances that would have been out of the question in terms of land transport. The importance of the parachute in making possible this high-speed, large-scale delivery of materiel is virtually impossible to exaggerate. With the development of supersonic aircraft, parachute escape techniques had to change. The seat ejection parachute was about to come into being. Initial testing involved men as well as machines. Seat ejection would have to be swift, but not so swift that pilots could not bear the acceleration stresses. During World War II, the Nazis had worked on an ejection seat design, and captured German film showed us something of the problems they had encountered. We didn't intend for this kind of thing to happen with our design. So the testing, the designing, and refining went on, in the search for a way to give a pilot and his parachute a protective package, a self-ejecting package which would get him clear of a supersonic jet in a hurry and with safety. It was a tough problem, but the solution was found, and the ejection seat principle was proven in practice. In still another way, the parachute has added a margin of safety to the flying of jet aircraft. Special braking chutes are standard equipment on many jets, giving pilots the ability to land safely on a much shorter runway than they could otherwise use. In the field of guided missiles, this same adaptation of the parachute has found wide use. The Regulus supersonic submarine missile is a good example. The missile is recoverable because it can be guided to a landing by escort aircraft, and because it uses a rugged nylon canopy to slow it to a safe, unswerving stop once it touches down. The Army's drone reconnaissance craft, controlled from the ground, can fly over enemy terrain, taking such detailed motion pictures as these for use by field commanders, and then return to base to be used again and again, because it carries its own recovery parachute to bring it and its cameras down gently. Para-rescue teams need special parachuting skills, and they practice them often. For instance, the right timing for slipping the harness in a water descent comes only with experience. Or take a jump over thick woods to battle a forest fire. A man needs know-how to land in the treetops and come out of it in one piece. In countless other situations as well, where relief could come only from the air, the parachute has brought supplies, aid, and comfort to those cut off from help. Recently, a lot of attention has been given to parachuting as a sport, both military and civilian. Skydiving, it's called, and clubs have sprung up everywhere. Perhaps it isn't likely to replace baseball as the national pastime, but few sports fans can claim the thrills that parachuting gives the skydiver. The parachute has truly come a long way from the early days of the barnstorming daredevils to its hundreds of uses in the world of today. The parachute has brought into being a whole new field of techniques and given a new type of fighting man to the modern Army. The airborne soldier of today must know everything that classic infantrymen had to know, and a great deal more. And the added training, the added mobility, the added striking power, which has come from the full development of the parachute's ability to deliver both assault troops and combat supplies, forms a central element of the fast-moving, hard-hitting Pentomic Army concept. Even with the space age opening up ahead, it seems safe to speculate that they are here to stay, the dependable, versatile umbrellas of the sky.